Alright guys, how's it going? And welcome to the Testosterone channel. So today I think it would be very interesting to focus on the very few bodybuilders on the planet that actually managed to beat Arnold Schwarzenegger on the bodybuilding stage. Okay, so I think we all know that Arnold Schwarzenegger is one of the greatest bodybuilders that ever lived. Even though it's unfair to compare him to someone like Ronnie Coleman. Yes, obviously Ronnie Coleman was much bigger and stronger than Arnold, since Coleman would weigh around 330 pounds in the off-season and around 300 pounds on stage, whereas Arnold would compete somewhere around 230 to 235. And on top of that, Arnold was even a few inches taller than Coleman. But again, we're talking about two completely different eras. So if Arnold Schwarzenegger was so much smaller than Ronnie Coleman and many other bodybuilders later on in the 90s, the 2000s, why is it that he's considered one of the biggest or perhaps the greatest bodybuilder that ever lived? Well, probably because Arnold opened the doors for so many other bodybuilders. So even in the world of bodybuilding, which is all about being big and buff, I guess size doesn't matter in this case. And also let's not forget that Arnold back in the 1970s was literally unbeatable. Nobody could touch him. And the movie Pumping Iron certainly did not hurt either. So with 7 Mr. Olympia titles, 5 Mr. Universe titles, and with the most perfectly developed physique, maybe ever. Okay, so I guess we can ask this question. If Arnold was literally Mr. Flawless, Mr. Perfect, why is it that he lost not only once, not even twice, but 3 times to 3 different competitors on the bodybuilding stage? Well, maybe because life is hard. One of the songs in Rocky had the title, "You have to lose before you can win." Or, as a lot of business owners would say, you fail your way to success. Now, we all know that losing sucks, but that's also where most of the lessons are. So why would that be any different for Arnold? Now, let's take a look at the very few guys on the planet that has managed to whoop Arnold's booty on the bodybuilding stage. So the first bodybuilder on the list that has managed to take down the Terminator himself was a bodybuilder named Chester Jordan, also nicknamed Chet Jordan. And this happened in 1966, when Arnold was just 19 years old. This was the first time that Arnold competed in Mr. Universe. Most people still remember Arnold for being the man of the show, probably because a lot of people had sort of heard about him, but they had never seen him in action. I believe at the time Arnold had 50 centimeter arms, which is equivalent to 20 inches, and no one at that point had seen that. Okay, so who was Chet Jordan? Well, Jordan was born in 1940 and he passed away in 2020 at 80 years of age. He was an American bodybuilder who became known as the father of natural bodybuilding. That also means, if we get the math correctly here, that he was about 7 years older than Arnold Schwarzenegger when he defeated him on stage. Arnold has openly admitted that he did use enhancement drugs when he was younger, and I believe he started as young as 18 or 19 years of age. But at the time it wasn't illegal, unlike today. So that also means that Chet Jordan was actually natural on stage when he defeated Arnold that wasn't, which is actually quite interesting. Now, of course, Arnold was just a teenager at the time, and at the very next show, Arnold Schwarzenegger won the Mr. Universe title, making him the youngest Mr. Universe ever at just 20 years of age. Now, Chet Jordan actually has a heroic story to his name. Though he was not very athletic when he was a kid, he actually was in a life-threatening auto accident while in high school. He sustained several severe cuts and shattered bones in his pelvis, legs, and elbow. One of his legs was to be amputated, but the doctors were able to save it with a metal plate. His doctors agreed that he could rehabilitate himself with light weight training from his wheelchair. And that's pretty much how he was introduced to the world of dumbbells, training, and bodybuilding. Now keep in mind, this happened when he was just a teenager. However, less than a decade later, he managed to compete on the Mr. Universe stage, winning the trophy. And on top of that, he beat Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now this is a true Rocky story. Okay, so quickly let's go over the man's competitive career. In 1963, he won the title Mr. Los Angeles. And the following year, he won the title Mr. Pacific Coast. In 1966, he won the Mr. America title, which was also a big deal. And then, of course, he won the Mr. Universe title, in which he beat Arnold Schwarzenegger. What I don't think he or anyone at the time knew was that one of the things he would be remembered as was the first man to ever beat Arnold Schwarzenegger on the bodybuilding stage. Because at the time, Arnold was just a young, up-and-coming bodybuilder, and not the legend that we later got to know. So other than having beat Arnold, he's also best remembered as being the father of natural bodybuilding. And yes, you can see the man was extremely gifted and perfect genetics for natural bodybuilding. Later on, he also became known as the man that tried to influence bodybuilding shows and fitness and bodybuilding magazines by focusing on natural bodybuilding. Alright, so the next guy on the list that have managed to outpose or steal the trophy from Arnold Schwarzenegger, through sportsmanship of course, is the legendary Frank Zane. This happened in Miami in 1968, and it was the very first time that Arnold ever came to America. Now keep in mind, at the time Arnold was already Mr. Universe, so Arnold walked up on stage like he owned the place, thinking that he was going to blow the competition away. And what happened? Well, he lost. Or at least he placed second, which still isn't bad. But when you're used to winning, you want to win all the time. Arnold was definitely the biggest man on stage, somewhere between 240 and 250 pounds, whereas Frank Zane, that actually ended up winning, didn't weigh more than 185 pounds. Arnold could not understand any of it. Now Frank Zane has become known as Mr. Aesthetic. He had a very chiseled physique, which was a big thing in America. And that became a lesson for Arnold, that it's not about being the biggest, it's about being the best. Arnold literally cried all night, but the very next day he pulled himself together and said, okay, let's get back to the drawing board. It was around this time that Arnold realized to become the best of the best, he had to live and train in America. In Arnold's very first book, The Education of a Bodybuilder, this is how he refers to losing to Frank Zane and what his plan was. In Arnold's own words, he said, I would train in America, I would use their food and their knowledge and work it against them. I would make it in America too. Okay, so let's take a look at Frank Zane. He is without a doubt one of the greatest bodybuilders, at least of the 1970s. The man started competing in 1961 and his last show was in 1983. That's a total of 22 years on a competitive level. Very impressive. The highlight of the man's career was in the late 1970s when he won a total of 3 Mr. Olympia titles. In 1977, 78 and 79. Only topped by Arnold that had 6 Mr. Olympia titles at the time. Frank Zane was actually a school teacher and 5 years older than Arnold. Normally in the off-season he would weigh around 220 pounds, equivalent to 100 kilos. And on stage he would usually be somewhere between 190 and 200 pounds, or 87 to 91 kilos. So as you can see in these pictures, his body was completely different from Arnold. So does that make it better or worse? Well, I would say simply just very different. Obviously he had very different genetics, so getting huge on stage just wasn't really possible for him. However, what was possible was to end up looking like a Greek god, which really isn't so bad either. So as mentioned, he did beat Arnold at the 1968 Mr. Universe in Miami, Florida. And then they did not actually face off until 12 years later at the Mr. Olympia in Sydney, Australia, in which Arnold had his famous comeback after having been away from the sport for 5 years. Now that year in 1980, Frank Zane actually placed third, which really sucked if you were in Frank's shoes. Now there has been a lot of controversial Mr. Olympia shows, especially in the 1990s, but the 1980 and 1981 Mr. Olympia were without a doubt the 2 most controversial shows ever. In fact, I have an entire video about the 1980 Mr. Olympia that details Arnold's return to the sport of bodybuilding and all the drama that followed. I'll link it after this video. However, what nobody can take away from Frank Zane is that he's a 3-time Mr. Olympia and his physique is considered one of the greatest in the history of bodybuilding, since it's focusing mostly on symmetry and proportion. He was inducted in the IFBB Hall of Fame in 1999. Yes, absolutely nothing but props and respect for the man and his body. Let's just say his Mr. Olympia reign represented a shift in emphasis from mass to aesthetics. Frank Zane's physique featured the second thinnest waistline of all the Mr. Olympias ever, with his wide shoulders making for a distinctive V-taper. He was given the nickname The Chemist due to his Bachelor of Science degree. Or as Frank Zane would say, back in the day I took a lot of supplements and a ton of amino acids. Back then it was pretty unusual. And that's how he got the nickname The Chemist. Today he's 82 years of age and I believe he still resides in Southern California. Alright, and the very last man to ever defeat Arnold Schwarzenegger on the bodybuilding stage was Sergio Oliva. And this happened at the 1969 Mr. Olympia. Sergio was born in Guantanamo, Cuba in 1941, and he started competing at just 22 years of age. At the 1963 Mr. Chicago, throughout the 1960s, he was without a doubt one of the biggest bodybuilders in the world. He won everything from Mr. Illinois, Mr. America, Junior Mr. America, Mr. World, Mr. Universe, but best of all, he was a 3-time Mr. Olympia winner, just like Frank Zane a decade later. So in the late 1960s, and this is where Arnold would step on stage to square off with Sergio. Sergio was the #1 bodybuilder in the world, so it was absolutely no shame for Arnold to lose that fight. Now on stage, Sergio would stand at 5'10" and weigh around 225 pounds. So he was about 3-4 inches shorter than Arnold, but at the time he was still considered a very large bodybuilder. Sergio's waistline was just 27 inches. He's also considered by bodybuilding fans the world over to be one of the world's most genetically gifted bodybuilders. He set a whole new standard for competitive bodybuilding. He was loved by millions of people. He was huge and extremely proportioned, and he used to bring chills to his adversaries. This is how he acquired his nickname, The Myth. Now I should mention that Arnold has always had a lot of respect for the man. And on this Mr. Olympia night in 1969, Arnold lost to Sergio. However, the following year, Arnold actually beat Sergio not just once but twice. First in the 1970 Mr. World, and then shortly after in the Mr. Olympia contest, which was Arnold's first Mr. Olympia win ever. Sergio's competitive bodybuilding career, I would say, was just as impressive as Frank Zane's. Sergio competed from 1963 and all the way to 1985, and finally retired at the age of 44, which at the time was considered senior citizen for a bodybuilder, whereas today it's not that unusual really. So there you go, guys. 3 legendary bodybuilders that managed to defeat Arnold Schwarzenegger. Chet Jordan in 1966, Frank Zane in 1968, and Sergio Oliva in 1969. Now guys, please do me a favor and comment and let me know who was the greatest of these 3 bodybuilders. Chet Jordan, Frank Zane, or Sergio Oliva? Alright fellas, so that's all for today. But if you want to see some more action-packed videos, please like and subscribe. Around here we're talking about action movies, martial arts, bodybuilding, fitness, pretty much everything that deals with being a real man. Until next time, stay safe.